This week on Africa Update, almost 2 years after the official takeoff, only 8 African countries commence guided trading under the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. What is the impact of the Free Trade Agreement on intra-Africa trade volumes? Economic development expert Tokwe Fasua joins me to give perspectives to this. Also on the program, investigation by the BBC uncovers evidence on the killing of Sudanese migrants on the Morocco-Spanish border, where 18 people died, with over 70 still missing. Plus, our Africa Roundup, where we highlight some of the biggest stories on the continent. This is Africa Update on Trust Television, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. I am Ayuba Ilya. Welcome to the program. Now, 8 countries have commenced guided trading under the African Continental Free Trade Area. The initiative seeks to test the operational, institutional, legal and trade policy environment under the AFCFTA and to send an important positive message to African economic managers, says Secretary General of the AFCFTA, Wamkele Mene. Now, selected from across the 5 regions of the African Union, the countries include Ghana, Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, Egypt, Mauritius, Cameroon, and Tunisia.
Today, we are marking 96 products that are traded by 7 countries. Next year, we perhaps will have a chance to double or triple that number. But never underestimate, don't underestimate the determination that we have to make sure that the founding mothers and fathers, that their sacrifice was not in vain. So it is more than just a legal text. It is more than just ratification. It is Africa's economic development that is at stake. And so I'm extremely proud today in the world, but that we are able to demonstrate to ourselves as Africans.
Now, recall that after a 6-month delay due to the COVID-19 pandemic, trade kicked off under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement on the 1st of January 2021. Now, the Free Trade Agreement is targeted to bring together over 1.3 billion African people to do business, creating world's largest free trade area worth $3.4 trillion by eliminating tariff on at least 90% of the traded goods. It is projected to boost intra-African trade from 14.4% of total African exports to about 33%, and then also cut the continent's trade deficit by 51%. Now, the AFCFTA is also expected to lift 30 million Africans out of poverty by creating millions of jobs by the year 2035. Now, how is Africa doing business with Africa, and how is Africa doing business with the world? Now, take a look at these numbers. Available data by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Investment shows that in doing business with itself, the average of intra-African exports and imports was around 15.2% during the period 2015 to 2017. Comparative figures shows that in America, you have 47%, in Asia 61%, and then 67% for Europe and 7% for Oceania. The World Bank is also estimating that the AFCFTA has the potential to boost Africa's exports by $560 billion. Now, it is almost impossible to say how the free trade agreement has contributed to Nigeria's trade with other African countries. For instance, even as official data shows export that were on the increase now suddenly dropped by half while imports increased. Official figures from Nigeria's National Bureau of Statistics have revealed that Nigeria's trade with other African countries amounted to 1.305 trillion naira out of the 25.84 trillion naira worth of foreign trade recorded from January to June 2022. Now, here is what the Uganda's ambassador to Nigeria, Nelson Ochega, in a recent interview with our correspondent, has to say about intra-Africa trade between Nigeria and Uganda.
In terms of trade, for example, currently our trade volumes are very, very low. What Nigeria exports to Uganda does not exceed $10 million per annum. And the same for Uganda. But that does not mean that there are no tradable goods. They are there. In the case of Uganda, we can bring here milk and other milk products. We can bring here coffee. We can bring here tea. We can bring here wheat. We can bring tobacco. We can bring flowers. So that's what we can bring from Uganda to Nigeria. From Nigeria to Uganda, we have not benefited from your oil as yet. You can sell as oil and oil products. The market is there. Right now we are struggling to get those products from other parts of the world, but we are not getting it from Nigeria. The beauty now is that we have got both Uganda and Nigeria as signatories to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area.
All right, now joining me for more perspectives on this is economic development expert Tope Fasua, who joins me right here to talk about this. Thank you so much for joining us on Africa Update.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
All right, so let's start with the impact of the AFCFTA. I mean, what are the key indicators now to tell us how much the AFCFTA has impacted since the kickoff?
Well, I think it's been a bit measured, if you ask me. A few trades have happened. The first trade happened between Ghana and South Africa on the 4th of January this year. And then there was a pause again because of all the tentativeness over COVID and what have you. But then again, they relaunched in June or thereabouts, the end of June. And a few more trades have happened between Rwanda, Kenya, Ghana, Kenya, and so on. So, I mean, it's a bit indicative, if you ask me. It could be a lot much more than that. I mean, the dreams, of course, were deferred from the year 2020 till now. And we're hoping that it doesn't fizzle out. The structures have been put together. There's the head office in Ghana. There seems to be a bit of buzz around what needs to be done, but well, a lot of it is still talk, per se. A country like Nigeria that should actually be leading the charge has been a bit slow. And I've heard some stakeholders in Nigeria complain or express fears that perhaps, it's going to take something away from Nigeria. We need to be careful, and we don't want to be a dumping ground and all of that stuff. I think we ought to have got our act together before now. It's still an opportunity to increase intra-Africa trade.
So, but what are some of the hindrances that you have seen since the commencement of the AFCFTA?
So first, if we talk about the fact that African countries and leaders are good with talk, not so good with implementation, major hindrance. Number two, many African countries are still loyal to their colonial masters. We see Francophone and Anglophone those who are, to Portuguese, whatever phone they call that. Some are loyal to Portugal and so on. But the colonial powers are also still very powerful in the decision making for these African countries, and that's a major factor. The fact that some of them still have to take instructions before moving ahead. The fact that also some of them are being positioned as an entry point through which goods coming from some of those European countries will filter into Africa and continue to dominate what we do here. Because the whole idea of African free trade is to say that even if our goods were not up to par, maybe to the level of European standards, we should actually still manage it ourselves while we grow and develop. All right, that's what it is. And of course, another hindrance has been, of course, an act of God, COVID coming in. And with COVID came in, well, it's supposed to be an advantage to us as well. But COVID, first of all, ensured that every country started thinking about themselves. So rather than that cooperation, everybody started thinking in terms of self-sustainability, self-sustenance, self-reliance, and what have you. However, it's said to be that, look, the African Free Trade Agreement is meant to be a departure from that norm. Whereas if you look at many parts of, between Asia and Europe, between Asia and the Americas, for example, there's been a lull in terms of trade. In fact, another thing is that even shipping costs went up in some places ×5 after COVID. All right? So within Africa here, you still have to ship. If you were sending something from Ghana or Nigeria to South Africa, if it was a bulk kind of cargo, you still have to do some shipping. And of course, you have to rely on the 5 major companies around the world, Grimaldi, Maersk, and so on, who dominate the entire shipping industry, without whom you cannot. So shipping cost has increased. COVID has come. The reliance on colonial powers is still there. Getting the concept of intra-Africa trade right is still a problem. What are we going to be exchanging among ourselves? How do we proceed? Not to talk of the technical part, which players in Africa have not quite got the hang of it. That's what is called rule of origin, to say, how do you ensure that the goods that you are bringing in tax-free, tariff-free into your country from another African country is really produced at least 60% from in another African country? Yeah. Or is it just something that was transshipped from somewhere and dumped on you? So several issues are still there, but African countries have been encouraged to continue trading, and while some of those issues are cleared up.
All right, to what extent would you say that conflict has impacted on this move to, connect Africa as a continent?
It's a major issue, especially, interland trade. For example, now look at many parts of Nigeria are no-go areas. And then we still have, insurrection. Unfortunately for us, and I hear this repeated, I've agonized about it for quite a while, ISIS is meant to have disappeared around the world, but we still hear that in Nigeria, as if we're taking ownership for ISIS. I think we should be very strategic. When people speak in terms of ISIS, ISWAP, and all of that, and when I read European journals, American journals, I hear the defunct ISIS, the ISIS that's no more. Okay.
And we have also countries, Mali, like Burkina Faso,
exactly.
Chad, and the rest.
Exactly. And so we need to be very careful so that we don't inherit the bot of terrorism around the world, which will hamper trade around this axis. And of course, well, we've been able to get a hang on piracy in the Gulf of Guinea. We don't hear a lot of that anymore, but there are still pockets of disturbance everywhere. The in the eastern Congo is still a problematic area. Different parts in Mali, Mauritania, there's still areas. Libya is still a major problem, and from Libya flowed a lot of these arms into different territories in Africa, including Nigeria. So that's an issue. But I think, again, that we can skirt around that, okay? We can skirt around that. Yeah.
But how much have we done in terms of infrastructure, connecting, the countries?
We haven't done a lot. It's a major issue.
Since then. Yeah.
Yes, it's a major issue. We haven't done a lot. We haven't done a lot. Again, it's something that they hope will move side by side. For example, we should have intra-Africa roads. There's a road that has been promised from Lagos to Abidjan, which hasn't, the present administration in Nigeria tried to action it, but I'm not sure they've moved quite on that. There's another, but I think that we've managed to do one connecting Cameroon down in maybe Taraba or thereabouts, which is a good one. But Africa needs to think big. We also had the influence of China. which helped us to open up a lot of roads and lanes. You know, there's a train route that comes from Mombasa, goes into Uganda. Uganda is meant to be a landlocked country, you know, and so on. So that's a very big investment. However, Chinese investment has also dried up. For some reason, China has its own issues to worry about. COVID was an issue for everybody. Productivity went down, GDP growth went down, except there's a renaissance. And I would actually push that because we saw tangible results in dealing with China, it seemed like the West had got a bit tired of many African countries weren't seeing many, initiatives which were tangible and real, coming from Western countries, and of course the colonial powers seemed not to be cooperating with themselves until the force called China came, and we could see new airports coming up, new railroads, and all of that coming up in Africa, new roads, the belt and what they call it, all of those things came up, and but now China seems to have cooled off. They're not disbursing anymore. We need to find a way of calling them back up.
All right, thank you so much, economic development expert Tokwe Fasua, for joining us on Africa Update and for your perspectives. Thank you. This is Africa Update on Trust Television, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. After the break, BBC uncovers evidence on the killing of Sudanese migrants on the Morocco-Spanish border, where 18 people died with over 70 still missing. Join us again. Now, the BBC has uncovered evidence which raises new questions for the Moroccan and Spanish authorities about the fate of dozens of migrants trying to cross into territory in North Africa, which is part of Spain. The deaths took place at a border crossing that separates Morocco and the tiny Spanish territory of Melilla. On 24th of June 2022, a large group of migrants were crushed at a crossing point from Morocco into Melilla. At least 24 migrants died, but the death toll is thought to be higher, with more than 70 still missing.
For months, we've been searching for the truth about what's happened here, Barrio Chino, the fortified border crossing on the Spanish-Moroccan border, where African migrants were beaten and crushed to death.
And they beat you, and they kick you down.
For the first time, the BBC's Africa Eye has pieced together dozens of videos from June the 24th.
If you are not lucky, you're gonna die.
70 like this, yeah.
Dead?
Yeah, he's dead. And I see some of them with my eyes.
We travelled here to the Spanish territory of Melilla that borders Morocco, a gateway into Europe protected by a border wall nearly 7 miles long. And to build a full picture, we've spoken to dozens of survivors: Ishmael, Stephen and Mohammed. We begin their journey in the forests above Melilla. They camped here for months. These videos show clashes with police. Migrants told Africa Eye the Moroccan authorities warned them to leave or face live bullets.
We decided to come down from the mountain because they attacked us 3 times.
The Moroccan authorities?
Yeah, the Moroccan military and police.
And this is the moment they reach the border fence. Now watch as they approach this gate. Security forces keep them moving with a barrage of tear gas, rocks and smoke bombs. Hundreds make it through, and inside the courtyard of the border facility, many become stuck in this area we've highlighted. And there's a crush while Moroccan police continue to fire tear gas.
More than 700 or how?
Trapped?
Inside, yeah, in the truck, more than 700. You feel like you never breathe because a lot of people.
This disturbing video inside Barrio Chino shows how some were treated. Once detained, many were kept on the ground with injured and dead people among them, seemingly without medical care.
I saw them, yeah, I was there.
What did you see?
I was there. They figured us like we are animals. They start to beat you by any way.
After weeks of negotiation, we were given access inside Barrio Chino, the border facility. Spanish authorities claimed all the deaths happened in an area they called no man's land.
Yes, you are watching. We call no man's land.
But our time here revealed new evidence. These videos are upsetting but important to show. The dead and injured are in so-called no man's land. But in this video, the gate into Spanish-controlled land has been forced open and there's a crush. And here, 3 lifeless bodies are slumped against the blue gate. The same blue gate we're standing in front of here with the Spanish Guardia Civil. Spanish-controlled territory.
If you just open these gates, the migrants would have lived, survived.
Not exactly, because it could be a risk for our people. We were about 50 or 60 officers trained to stop thousands of people.
We've also verified this video. A man on the floor is surrounded by Moroccan police. His body lifeless on Spanish-controlled land. His name is Anwar, and he was Mo's friend.
Sometimes, yeah, I see Anwar in my dream. The last coffee that I drank was him. He told me, last one, see me on the other side.
And what happened to those who made it to Spain? 133 people requested asylum. But this footage shows Moroccan forces entering Spanish land, returning migrants. 470 were pushed back with no opportunity to claim asylum. And some were later beaten.
Really shameful what happened. Europe is paying countries that do not respect human rights to control European borders, and then that's what happens. That's the violence that these policies are causing.
The Spanish Interior Ministry said our findings were false. Reasonable force was used, and all rejections at the border were legal.
I am a policeman in Morocco.
Moroccan authorities have repeatedly denied or ignored our requests for interviews.
That he doesn't want you to film.
In July, a Moroccan-sanctioned report said migrants were armed and violent and died from suffocation. Campaigners say 77 people are still missing. Nobody's been held to account. And the final death toll may never be known.
Now, meanwhile, United Nations rights experts decried the lack of accountability for the stark dehumanization of African migrants after many were killed trying to cross from Morocco to Spain in June. The incident on June 24th, when around 2,000 mostly Sudanese nationals tried to enter the Spanish enclave, marks one of the deadliest attempted crossings in years. The United Nations Rights Office said that at the time that at least 23 people had died. But in a recent statement, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination and xenophobia, and the working group of experts on people of African descent put the toll at least 37. The experts said that they condemned the continuing lack of accountability for stark dehumanization of African migrants at the perimeter of Europe. Now, let's take a look at Africa Roundup, where we highlight some of the biggest stories on the African continent. The China Harbour Engineering Company Limited handed over Nigeria's first deep sea port to the government after the completion of the huge maritime project in the country's economic hub city of Lagos. The completion ceremony of Lekki Port, which took place at the Lekki area site in Lagos State, brought together dignitaries and stakeholders from Nigeria and China, as well as their international partners. In his address, Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu expressed his gratitude to the Chinese government for its support of Nigeria's infrastructure and praised Chinese enterprises for completing the project construction efficiently and on schedule.
This new port will position Lagos as a new maritime logistics hub, not only in West Africa, in the whole Central and West Africa region, while also positioning our country, Nigeria, to attain full economic leadership potential under the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement.
Meanwhile, President Muhammadu Buhari has commissioned the newly constructed border bridge linking Nigeria and Cameroon, including a joint border post for seamless trade and migration between the two countries. President Buhari and President of Cameroon, Paul Biya, performed the joint inauguration of the 1.5-kilometer Ekok-Mfum Bridge and joint border post at Mfum Cross River State. Performing the ceremony, the duo said that the Link Bridge project will deepen socio-economic and diplomatic relations between Nigeria and Cameroon, while the joint border post will not only strengthen the existing cordial relations but enhance the volume of economic activities in the region, as well as movement of persons, goods and services with countries along the corridors. Now, Cameroonian traders living on the border with Equatorial Guinea are suffering a lot since the closure of Equatorial Guinean land borders as campaigns begin in the Central African country. On October 25, Vice President Teodoring Goumea Obiang justified this measure as a way to prevent the infiltration of groups that may try to destabilize the campaign without giving an official date for the reopening of borders and specifying that only airports will remain open. Many are taking prohibited routes through the bush to attend to their usual errands as the popular KOC. All right, now the Ethiopian government and regional forces from Tigray agreed to cease hostilities 2 years into a war that has killed thousands, displaced millions, and left hundreds of thousands facing famine. About 2 weeks after formal peace talks mediated by the African Union began in the South African capital, Pretoria, delegates from both sides signed an agreement on a permanent cessation of hostilities. The two parties in the Ethiopian conflict have formally agreed to the cessation of hostilities as well as to systematic, orderly, smooth, and coordinated disarmament, said Olusegun Obasanjo, head of the AU mediation team at a ceremony. Obasanjo, a former Nigerian president, said that the agreement also included restoration of law and order, restoration of services, unhindered access to humanitarian supplies, and protection of civilians. M23 rebels have made gains in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, raising fears of a further deterioration of security. The African Union has called for a ceasefire and negotiations to ensure peace. The March 23 movement, widely known as M23, tightened its grip on several territories by seizing the towns of Kiwanja and Rushuru, cutting North Kivu's capital, Goma, off from the upper half of the province. The AU statement expressed extreme concern at the deteriorating security situation in eastern DRC. Meanwhile, Kenya has deployed troops to the Democratic Republic of Congo as part of regional military intervention to support the Congolese regime against rebels operating in eastern DRC, Kenyan President William Ruto announced. The European Union has signed 6 financing agreements with Mozambique, and they are worth more than 148 million euros for development programs in the country. The documents were signed Monday in the opening day of the ACP-EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly, which brings together in Maputo members of the European Parliament and the ACP, which represents 79 countries in Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. Now, included in the agreements are measures to complement the EU's actions in peace building and security in Cabo Delgado, as emphasized by the Vice President of the European Commission responsible for democracy and demography, Dubravka Suka. And that's a wrap on Africa Update for this week. Join us again next week for another time on the program. You can always watch us live on YouTube by subscribing, and also follow us across all social media platforms. I am Ayuba Ilya. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.